Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, the CEO of WBC. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 80 organizations focused on advancing women's leadership and hundreds of business leaders, building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, our staff, board of directors, and our WBC champions include more than 34% people of color. Every one of our action initiatives has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for the 4 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change, drive impact, and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose across the business landscape. We know that most organizations and the most successful ones are those that are intentional in bringing a diverse set of perspectives to the table. And this starts with ensuring that the company's recruitment efforts are inclusive and focused on reaching prospective talent that represents a variety of experiences and identities. I am delighted to be joined today by WBC board member and founder of The Find, Felicity Hassan, and managing director of the nonprofit and social impact practice at Koya Partners and Diversified Search, Myra Briggs. Myra, Felicity, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's exciting to be here.
So I really look forward to discussing with both of you, both leaders and disruptors, on the best practices for building an inclusive recruitment strategy. So let's set the stage. The talent landscape has changed in a variety of ways over the past few years, and the search for great talent has become even more competitive. What are your observations on the current state of the talent landscape? What have you seen change? What's the most significant change in recruiting diverse talent? Felicity, do we want to start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the last couple of years have been fairly hairy. We've seen this kind of like this ongoing pursuit towards, a recession that really never truly materialized, but kind of create an environment of caution around all of our activities from a recruitment perspective. So I would say we've seen a fair amount of reductions, and that has kind of like created an abundance of caution for both employers and employees. And I think it's fair to say that because women have tended to be, women and indeed communities of color and diverse communities as a whole, had tended to be kind of like to gravitate towards service-oriented opportunities or corporate functions roles, or just not P&L jobs. We've been disproportionately impacted by those reductions. Those are also the roles which aren't being hired back into organizations as quickly. And people are like playing it safe when it comes to their hiring, which is into old habits of hiring traditional candidates because they still perceive hiring candidates of difference to be a risk, even if it's a calculated risk. What are your thoughts, Myra?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think we were talking earlier about the fear on both sides, the candidate side as well as the side of the business. And I think the economy as well as the upcoming election are creating a situation where many organizations are afraid to make a false move. And when we're afraid to make moves, we are even less likely to make risky ones, right? At that. And so what's happened is we're really seeing the difference between those organizations that were truly making a commitment to inclusivity and equity around hiring and those that were doing it because it was the thing to do, that they needed to do it in order to be able to keep stockholders happy, in order to keep boards of directors happy. And those that are still doing it are the ones that were either doing it before or did truly have that epiphany that while there is a business case, it really is just the best way to be able to hold your space place in the world, right? And so as we begin to think about diversity of thought and the increase in productivity of organizations that embrace inclusive recruitment practices, the business case is clear. The issue, though, is that we have to fight human nature in order for us to get it across, which is the most difficult part.
Yeah. Changing behaviors is tough, and, people's belief structures are getting stronger and stronger, and we're getting more and more agency, for people to kind of like lean into their belief structures, which is fine. I don't think that we want to kind of change people's deeply held belief structures, but behaviors in the workplace are extremely important. You need to make sure that people are feeling like included and have a voice.
Absolutely.
So for those that are, sort of doing this right, sticking with their attention, to your point, Myra, about sort of not just doing it because they had to do it or fit sort of the norm at the time, what are some of the best practices that you've seen, right? And as you do that too, I always like to talk about, what are the successes and the best practices, and what are some of the, we call them stumbles, or what are some of the things we've learned from, like, this will not work, right? Felicity, I want to start with you again, because I think you've been working with a lot of companies as well on this kind of that intentionality and really driving that.
Yeah, I think the people who do this well, and this comes back to some of the points that Myra made before, the people who do this well understand that representative leadership and representative hiring is just good leadership. It's not like a DEI strategy. It's not anything other than just good leadership. So I would say, the companies who are succeeding are those who can effectively identify gaps, who can effectively look at opportunities within their organization, not as a backfill or something that they just need to rush and go out and like find a warm body. If you're squeezed on headcount and opportunity, then you want to really kind of lean in and be thoughtful about what your recruitment looks like. It should, at no level within your organization, certainly not at the executive level where Myra and I work, but at no level within your organization should a recruit ever be a rush job. And, we come across so many times, you'll speak to a hiring manager about, what's the most valuable asset that you have within this business, and they'll say their people. And then you'll be like, okay, how engaged are you going to be within this recruitment process? Because we'd really like to chat to you, at least once a week, maybe even a couple of times a week. And they're like, oh, don't really have time for that. And I'm like, okay, all right. So we're often tasked with, and I don't mind, like, I'm happy to write a job description. I'm happy to invest my time, but you have to be the kind of leader who understands the kind of investment that you need to put into your people, like bringing them into the organization, retaining them within your organization. So that's where organizations are differentiating themselves, is where they can identify gaps and where they have the confidence in their own capabilities to understand that difference is not a threat. It's not a weakness. It's an accelerant. Like, difference is what will take your business from here to here. That is what you should be looking for. It's easy to find somebody like you who's going to agree with you. That's not what you should be looking for. What you should be looking for is the exceptional case, somebody who brings like a different industry, a different skill set, a different perspective. And then you've got to encourage them to bring that perspective and support them in that perspective. So they don't feel like an outsider.
And it seems like, Myra, that brings it into kind of the culture that you were speaking about, kind of what's the culture of the organization? How are you bringing people in? How are you managing people? And then, like, as you said, Felicity, based on that, how much time are you spending going out to find that? Can I bring you in a little bit about those, companies
Absolutely.
that create that culture?
It's so funny that everyone always talks about recruitment, and you could go online and find 7,000 webinars about recruitment today, but if you go online and look for one about development and retention, or crickets, right? Because everyone is doing such a great job of paying attention to how to get people in the door, and not really recognizing that if you are doing as good of a job under recruitment as you are with retaining the talent that you're able to attract, then you might not have to recruit quite as much, right? This might end up being a different issue where we can focus more on making it a fruitful experience for people, really making sure that we are increasing representation, leading with authentic leadership. We can spend our time and our resources elsewhere. You won't put Felicity and I out of business by hiring well and retaining your people, right? Because
We would
then
love you to.
absolutely. Because then we would be hiring you because of growth, because organizations that are able to retain their top talent are organizations that are thriving and will be growing. And you'll still need us, right? So it works well for us that organizations really do double down on the retention and the development of the talent that they bring in, because it really does build in the credibility of not only your brand, but it also further emphasizes your mission. And like Felicity said, it is an accelerant. It should not be a deterrent for you to be able to hire well and retain the talent that you've hired.
So on that sort of leads to the natural question going back to, this is a business case. This is not just an HR issue, right? Like, how do you get that commitment across the organization? You were talking about, like, and I'm guessing it's who develops the job descriptions, how involved people are in the processes, and so forth. But I think what we need to talk about is, how do you build that commitment within an organization to the intentionality of looking for those different perspectives, those different backgrounds, so that your team is built up properly?
Well, if equity is your goal, move DEI out of HR, okay? Move DEI out of HR. That is an action that can take place right now. If you want everything within your organization to unfold through a lens of equity, then you need to elevate DEI to the executive level through which everything passes. And that is the first step. DEI is a function for people, but it is not a part of the people function. And I think if we can get that agreed upon, then I think you'll realize that when it comes to write the job descriptions, everything else in the organization has been set up for the job description to be an easy task if we elevate DEI to the sort of pinnacle level of the organization. If we only begin to think about DEI or inclusion when it comes to hire people, or when we're thinking about HR practices, and we're not thinking about it when we're talking about the finances of the organization, the mission, the programming, corporate structure, or any of the rest of those things, then it really is going to have the minimal effect that you put it into. Snakes grow as large as the environment that you put them in, right? And they will not grow bigger than they're supposed to grow if you keep them in a small space. So we can take DEI and put it in that same scenario, that if you put DEI in a small fishbowl in one corner of the organization, then that is exactly the impact that those initiatives are going to have. And I can say that organizations that are spending the money, the time, the other resources in order to drive forward inclusive practices, equity among hiring, and all of the rest of the places that it falls in the organization, are doing themselves a disservice by not putting it in a place where it will be as far reaching as it needs to be.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, to your point, Myra, this is about leaders like owning, like the culture is born out of the leaders, like really owning this space. And also understanding that diversity is more than just whatever happens to be the zeitgeist of the moment, right? We all know that diversity goes through phases, and there are kind of catalyst points that we're like, oh, okay, now it's like the Me Too movement. Now we're kind of like really thinking about, how we're representing our Black and African, the murder of George Floyd. Like it's not about those moments, as you very eloquently said earlier, Myra. It's about like the continuity of like what your business needs. And if you are a good leader, then you should be thinking about what your business needs holistically, and not thinking about like sticking a Band-Aid over something which hasn't been addressed. You can't suddenly go from an organization that did not embrace difference to an organization that has now got representation from every single individual from every different community. Like, let's just be logical about like what it is that you need and the journey that you need to take to get there, and own that as a leader in terms of like, what steps you need to go through and get whiplash along the way. You need this to be a smooth journey, because to your point, Myra, like what people drop the ball on is onboarding and retention. There's only so much I can do. I can find you a phenomenal person, but if they come in and they are under the spotlight every single day because they were asked to bring different opinions to the table, and they're the only person who's bringing those opinions, they're going to feel disruptive in a negative way, and they're not going to stay, or you're not going to keep them. And then the whole cycle like starts again, and you actually set yourself back. So you need like the leaders to really embrace this difference and really understand like where they are.
That's right.
Well, and that leads into that point about it, sort of not just being the people issue, right? It's the business issue, right? It's at every table, it's at every discussion. We talk in WBC a lot about corporate purpose being not just talent, but how you use your brand, how you invest in your community, what you're doing with supplier diversity. But the other thing in another vein you talk about too is looking outside your networks, right? From a business. And I know a lot of businesses compare themselves within the industry. Some of them look beyond their industry. So that leads to my question, coming as the CEO of Women Business Collaborative, right, is how important is it to have kind of external partners, external networks, in doing this work, and whether it's recruitment or whether it's what both of you are talking about now is creating culture that really buys into the importance of integrating those inclusive perspectives. How important are sort of networks and external partners in being able to get this work accomplished, I guess?
Mary, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say vitally important. Connection, partnership. If we're talking about diversity of thought, if we're talking about being able to just consistently bringing in new ideas, innovation is a word that has been elevated to the C-suite, where we now are seeing chief innovation officers and in the place of a chief strategy officer. And you simply cannot continue to be innovative and remain quote unquote in the know if you don't have partners, if you don't find yourself in the marketplace developing and cultivating relationships. So I think partnership is vitally important in all aspects of life, quite honestly, but especially when you're aiming to build inclusive cultures and everything that comes along with it.
I couldn't agree more. I think, it's the partnerships that turn the words into action. People have, values and mission and objectives, painted on the wall, but it's your partnerships and your commitment and your investment in those various communities that actually demonstrate that commitment. So it's more than just words. It's like, hey, this is who we're partnering with, because these are the people who are legitimately moving the needle, and we want to be part of that movement. And like that is where organizations like WBC, who is so action oriented, really come into the picture and really can kind of demonstrate to your employees that like we're committed to this. We don't just talk about it. We're really committed to it. We're taking action, and like these are some of the results of those actions.
Action for impact. And that's how we end these LinkedIn Lives as we're coming up against time. We end always with a call to action. It can be for the audience, it can be for the companies and organizations, but why don't we start with you, Myra? What is your call to action today?
Authentic leadership is always my call to action. If you're leading authentically, if it's good, it's great. If it's not good, at least we know, right? We can fix it. And so I really think striving for authentic leadership, it covers all bases.
Felicity.
I think identify that difference is strength, and seek out the people who think differently to you. That's a positive thing. It might be harder to manage, but the positive outcomes of that will be beautiful. They will take you to great places.
We will be stronger. I love that. So thank you both. And that is all we have time for today. It went by quickly, as it always does, but I think substantively. So to the audience, we invite you to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in specific industries like STEM, but also women as investors and controllers of capital, and to advance this pipeline of women leaders that are going to bring gender, pay equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. So let's get stronger together. So join us weekly to keep up to date on the movement for gender equity in business and the latest issues by following us on social media at WB Collaborative on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Felicity and Myra, thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to work with you guys